You're 12 years old. It's 40,000 BC, somewhere in the cold hills of Europe. Everyone says you should already be a parent by now. That's the story anyway. You've heard it 100 times. Ancient humans grew up fast and died young. Married at 12. Kids at 13. Dead by 30. A brutal, compressed little life. It's in documentaries. It's in classrooms. It's in half the comments under this video. There's just one problem with that story. The bones don't agree with it. Not the Ice Age bones, not the Roman gravestones, not the DNA. Almost everything you've been told about this traces back to one misread number. And the truth is stranger than the myth, considerably stranger. So let's ask the question properly. Did ancient humans really have kids at 12? And if they didn't, where on earth did that number come from? Because think about it for a second. A 12-year-old body is not a finished body. Childbirth is the single most dangerous thing a human body can physically do. A narrow pelvis, a big-headed baby, no surgeon, no antibiotics, no transfusion. Doing that at 12 isn't a survival strategy. It's a coin flip with two bad sides. Evolution is ruthless about this. It does not reward reproducing before you're ready. If early motherhood kills mothers, that lineage ends. The genes go with it. So either ancient humans spent 200,000 years being wildly self-destructive, or we have been reading the evidence backwards. It's the second one. It's not one thing. It's never one thing. There are several layers here. A misquoted law, a confused statistic, a body that physically couldn't, and a myth that stuck around because it sounded about right. We'll take them one at a time, from the easy ones to the strange ones. And at the end, there's a fact about your own puberty almost nobody surfaces. It quietly flips this entire question upside down. Let's go. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the number 12. It's a legal minimum. It isn't a memory. It isn't a measurement. It's a line in Roman law. Rome set the minimum marriage age at 12 for girls, 14 for boys. And that single line is where the whole myth quietly begins. But a legal minimum has never told you what people actually did. Think about the rules you live under right now. In many countries, you can drive at 16. That doesn't mean the average driver is 16. Nobody would make that mistake. You can technically be a senator at 30. Most senators are nowhere near 30. A floor is not an average. Everybody knows this. Somehow with Rome, we forgot. And there's a second problem sitting right underneath the first one. The Romans who wrote things down were not ordinary Romans. They were the elite, senators, landowners, the families with marble and money. A sliver of the population, maybe 1 or 2% of everyone alive. Elite Roman girls did marry early, somewhere between 12 and 15, our sources say. Those marriages were political. They were treaties with a wedding attached. Land, alliances, inheritance. The bride was the signature on the contract. And here's the quiet joke at the center of all this. We took the wedding habits of Rome's richest families and called it human nature. That's like reading a royal wedding invitation and concluding that's how everyone dates. The other 98% of Romans left almost no literature behind. But they left something better. They left their gravestones. And gravestones, it turns out, are far more honest than poetry. Here's what almost everyone skips. Marriage and childbirth are not the same event. We collapse them together because in our heads, they sit next to each other. In the ancient world, they often sat years apart, sometimes many years apart. In 1987, two historians found a way to hear the silent 98%. Richard Saller and Brent Shaw did something clever with Latin gravestones. They didn't read what the stones said about the dead. They read who paid for them. Because in Rome, whoever buried you also carved their own name into your stone. A young girl's stone was carved by her parents, almost always by her parents. A married woman's stone was carved by her husband, almost always by her husband. So find the age where the carver flips from parent to husband. And you've just found the age Romans actually got married. No poetry required. That's not a guess. That's thousands of stones voting on the answer. And the answer was not 12. It was not close to 12. Ordinary Roman women were marrying in their late teens, not their early 12s, and they were starting to have children at around 20 years old. Ordinary Roman men married even later, often not until their late 20s, which is, and I want you to sit with this, roughly what people do now. 2,000 years, an empire's collapse, and the number barely moved. Now let's leave Rome entirely. Rome is recent. Rome is practically yesterday. Let's go back to the bodies themselves, back to the Ice Age. Here's the thing, nobody tells you about ancient bones. They keep a diary. Your skeleton records your growth the way a tree records its seasons. Puberty leaves marks, real, physical, readable marks, right there in the bone. The wrist, the hip, the base of the neck, each one a checkpoint. In 2024, a team of archaeologists decided to read those checkpoints. They published it in the Journal of Human Evolution, and the results were quietly strange. Their sample was 13 adolescents who died in Europe long, long ago, between 10,000 and 30,000 years old, some of them Ice Age teenagers. These are rare. Teenagers don't usually die, which is exactly the problem. Healthy teenagers survive, so an Ice Age teenage skeleton is an archaeological jackpot. 13 of them, and every one of them had something to say. Here's the first finding, and it's not what you'd expect at all. Most of them entered puberty by about 13 and a half years old, which is almost exactly when teenagers in wealthy modern countries enter puberty. 30,000 years apart, and puberty starts at essentially the same moment. Think about that for a second. Your body clock is basically an Ice Age clock. But then the study found the second thing, and this is the important one. Entering puberty and being able to have a baby are very different milestones. Puberty is the engine starting. It is not the car leaving the driveway. There are years between those two events, years the myth pretends don't exist. So the researchers looked for the mark that menstruation leaves behind. They had 5 female skeletons to work with, a small sample, and they said so. And the answer they landed on was 16, possibly 17. No earlier than 16. That's when Ice Age girls started menstruating. Now go back and read the myth again, and watch it fall apart. An Ice Age 12-year-old girl had probably not started menstruating at all. Not late, not unusual, not unlucky, just 12. She couldn't have had a baby at 12, not culturally, physically. The question wasn't whether she was allowed. Her body simply wasn't there yet. And here's the number that should genuinely stop you. Ready? The average age of first menstruation in the modern United States is 11.9. 16 back then, 11.9 now. Read that twice. Modern children reach that milestone years earlier than Ice Age children did. Hold on to that. We're coming back to it, and it changes everything. Here's what nobody tells you about the years right after puberty starts. Your body isn't finished saying no. It's just started saying maybe. Biologists have a name for this. It's called adolescent subfecundity. It's a clumsy word for a simple idea, so let me just show you. After menarche, cycles are irregular for years, often for several years. Many of those early cycles don't release an egg at all. So having periods and being reliably fertile are, again, two different things. Nobody knows exactly why we evolved this way, and that's an honest answer. But the best guess is that it buys a body time to finish. A pelvis has to widen, bones have to lock into their adult shape. Growing a baby while you're still growing yourself is a losing trade. Two bodies competing for the same food. Nobody wins that competition. So biology installed a delay, not a moral rule, a physiological one. And you can watch that delay play out in living hunter-gatherer societies today. Anthropologists have studied these communities carefully for decades, in real detail. Teenagers in these societies are often sexually active. That part is true. There's no supervising authority, no paperwork, no curfew, no chaperone. And yet, the average age at first birth clusters right around 19. 19, with no rules stopping anyone. That's the body deciding, not the culture, which tells you something important about the world before contraception. The gap between first sex and first baby wasn't discipline, it was biology. Nobody was enforcing it. Their bodies simply weren't ready to cooperate. Now here's the chapter that surprises people most, the Middle Ages. This is where the child bride image lives in most people's heads. Castles, arranged marriages, a 14-year-old bride in a big embroidered dress. And historians have spent decades quietly explaining that this is wrong. Not slightly wrong. Wrong in the way that the answer is nearly reversed. There's a demographic pattern named after the historian John Hudgnall. He looked at northwestern Europe before industry and found something odd. Women there were marrying at 24 to 26 years old. Men were marrying at 27 to 29. Later than women, as usual. Read those numbers again and notice something uncomfortable about them. They're the same as yours. Medieval peasants married at modern ages. And it gets stranger. 10 to 20% of women never married at all. Never. Not late, not widowed, simply never married by choice or circumstance. Because in this system, you married when you could afford a household. Not when you hit a birthday, when you had a roof and an income. So young women spent their teens working as servants, as apprentices, as labor. They left home at 14 to earn, not to marry. That's the actual pattern. A decade of independent adult life before any wedding happened. Now, the legal minimum in medieval England was still 12 for girls, 14 for boys. Same trap as Rome, same misreading, 6 centuries later. But here's the detail that really closes this chapter shut. Researchers looked at England's wealthiest families between 1150 and 1500. The richest people, the exact ones most likely to marry children off young. And more than half of their daughters married at 15 or older. Even the aristocracy mostly didn't do the thing they're famous for doing. Child marriage was legal, rare, and mostly a story about property. Which brings us to the last piece of evidence, and it's the one that can't argue. Here's the thing. Nobody tells you about your own DNA. It's a receipt. Every time a baby is made, a few brand new mutations appear from nowhere. Not inherited, not copied, brand new in that child for the first time. Geneticists call these de novo mutations, Latin for from the beginning. And here's the part that makes them useful. They accumulate with your age. An older father passes on more of them. So does an older mother. Which means the number of mutations in a child is a clock. Count the mutations, and the clock tells you how old the parents were. In 2023, a team at Indiana University decided to run that clock backwards. Richard Wang and Matthew Hahn started with living families. Real, modern, measurable families. They used 1,548 parent-child trios. Families where they knew exactly how old both parents were at conception. And in those families, they counted 101,000 mutations. That gives you a calibration, a conversion rate between mutations and years. Now take that conversion rate and point it at ancient genomes instead. Suddenly you can read the parental ages of people who died before writing existed. No gravestone, no document, no archaeologist's guess, just arithmetic. They ran it across 250,000 years of human history. 250,000 years. Ice ages, migrations, the whole story. And the answer came back with almost boring consistency. The average age at conception across all of it was 26.9 years. 27, not 12. 27 for 250,000 years. They could even split it by sex, which is where it gets fun. Fathers averaged around 31. Mothers averaged around 23. 23 for mothers. That's an average, so some were younger. But an average of 23 does not get built out of 12-year-olds. The arithmetic simply doesn't allow it. You'd need impossible numbers on the other side. And they checked it regionally too, which is a nice touch. In Europe, across the last 40,000 years, the interval was 26.1. In East Asia, 27.1. Different continent, basically the same answer. 2 separate populations, tens of thousands of years apart, one stubborn number. That's not a coincidence. That's a species with a settled rhythm. And that's not a metaphor. That's a real number from real genomes. Now, there's one objection left, and it's the one you're already thinking. They died at 30, so obviously they had to start early, right? It's a fair objection. It's also built on the same kind of mistake. Life expectancy at birth is an average, and averages hide their own shape. Ancient infant mortality was brutal. A huge share of babies died very young. Put a lot of zeros into an average, and the average collapses. But that 30 is not a prediction about any individual adult. It's a statement about how many children never made it past 5. Survive childhood, and your odds change completely, dramatically, immediately. A hunter-gatherer who reaches adulthood often reaches their 60s or 70s. Old age is not a modern invention. Old people have always existed. They were just rarer, and they were absolutely essential, and everybody knew it. So no, ancient humans were not sprinting through a 30-year life. They were walking through a long one, and burying a lot of babies. Those are very different tragedies, and we've been telling the wrong one. Now let's be honest, because the myth isn't made of nothing. Very young mothers existed. That is not in dispute, and I won't pretend otherwise. There's a Neanderthal skeleton from Spain, estimated at roughly 15 years old. Her pelvis carries changes that suggest she had given birth. 15, not 12, but young and absolutely real. One person, one skeleton. And elite Roman girls really did marry between 12 and 15. Some of them almost certainly had children far too early and paid for it. These aren't footnotes. These were people. The exceptions had names. But an exception isn't an average. That's the entire error in one sentence. We took the rarest, saddest cases and made them the headline. Then we told ourselves it was normal. That's the mistake worth correcting. There's one last thing I saved for the end, and it's the wildest part. Because so far, we've only established that ancient humans didn't reproduce early. But the real question is why? And the answer isn't about them at all. Let's compare ourselves to our closest living relatives, the chimpanzees. A wild female chimpanzee has her first baby at around 14 years old. 14, which is, notice, younger than any honest human number we found. Hunter-gatherer humans, with no rules and no contraception, average 19. So we are 5 years slower than a chimpanzee. Think about that. We're not the fast breeders of the ape family. We're the late bloomers. Humans took the ape schedule and deliberately, evolutionarily, slowed it down. And that is one of the strangest things about our species. Every other ape rushes. We are the ones who waited. Because we bought something with those years, we bought grandmothers. A chimpanzee mother at 14 might have 15 more years of life. A hunter-gatherer mother at 19 may have 40 healthy years ahead. 40 years, enough to raise children and then help raise theirs. Most hunter-gatherer women live well past menopause. Chimpanzees mostly don't. That extra stretch of life is where being human actually happens. Knowledge, teaching, memory, help, all of it needs an old person alive to give it. Reproduce at 12, and you get none of that. You get a shorter, poorer story. So the delay wasn't a limitation. The delay was the whole invention. And now, go back to that number I asked you to hold on to. Ice Age girls started menstruating at 16. Modern American girls at 11.9. Better food, better childhoods, fewer infections, bodies hitting the gas earlier. Which means the 12-year-old mother is not an ancient figure at all. She's a modern one. She's biologically newer than the smartphone is old. Here it is, plainly. The 12-year-old mother isn't a relic of the past. She's a product of the present, and we blamed our ancestors for her. Ancient humans didn't have kids at 12. Their daughters weren't able to. Ours can. That's the sentence I'd like you to actually sit with. So go back to that ridge, 40,000 BC. You're 12 years old. Nobody is waiting for you to be a mother. Nobody expects it. You have years ahead of you, years to grow, to learn, to be useless. Useless in the way children are supposed to be useless, expensive and protected. That long, slow, wasteful childhood is the most human thing about you. It's not a modern luxury. It's 40,000 years old, at minimum. We didn't invent slowing down. We inherited it, and then we forgot. Your ancestors weren't racing through life. They were taking their time. They lived long enough to become grandparents. Long enough to tell you this. The story only survived because somebody was old enough to carry it. You are the descendant of people who chose to wait. Every one of them. All the way back. That's the whole inheritance.